Hello again, gang. KR King here, helping you homebrew your own D&D campaign. And today is the third and final video in my series on the Dungeon of the Mad Mage Level 3. And this is where, as always, I go over the GM secrets that are contained in this area of the module. And I use the sneer marks because these are really not so much as secrets as they are sort of tricks of the trade. Things that you should notice that these designers put in, both good and bad, that will influence you whether you're running this module or you're designing your own dungeons or mega dungeons. What are those? Well, you'll see. All right, so the idea here about breaking down, dungeon design into components is that it's a little more easily digested in terms of thinking about how you're designing your dungeons, the geography of the dungeon, the composition of forces, what the players are going to see, how difficult is it for them to enter and exit the dungeon. And I just listed a few of these concepts, which are: where are the entrances and exits? What are the rewards versus the risks of exploring the entire level? Who makes up the power centers of NPCs and monsters that control large areas and key access points of the dungeon? How do the levels above and below affect your current level, which I call interlevel contextuality? How do you create a dynamic dungeon as opposed to one that is static? Where and why do you use resource draining monsters? And the thing is, these concepts interact with each other. So let's say you have the fact, monsters come and go and interact on different levels. This creates a sense of a dynamic dungeon. The entrances and exits of your dungeon can influence where you have resource drains, because these are often in dead-end areas where monsters will sort of lurk and hide, waiting for someone to go down this blind hallway. They won't necessarily hang out in a high traffic area because eventually things are going to, encounter them that are tougher than them. All right, so if we look at the entrances and exits on level 3, you've got the stairs coming down from level 2 up here, and then the players have to go all the way down through here to get to these stairs to level 4. Which means that the players are going to have to go through areas controlled by the biggest power center on this level, the Drow, led by the Drow High Priestess Trissa. Now, most likely it's going to be Area 20, the old Dwarven city, but it's possible that they could go through these torture rooms in Area 7, wind their way through Area 8, and then come down the River Sargoth and go in that way. And the river itself forms an exit from this level. If you take it downriver to the west, it goes to Skullport, the underground city that the Beholder's Anathar controls. And if you go up here to the north, it's unknown. It doesn't say where it goes. And this points to a complication of having rivers in your dungeon. Where do they lead to and where did they come from? Now, you may want to make these inaccessible. In other words, both the end point for the players at the beginning are they go through fissures in the rocks, super narrow. They bubble up from some super deep pool, such that it's just not worth it for them, or would really be difficult for them to continue on this river. Because the idea of a water source is it's interesting in and of itself. There is some movement back and forth depending on the current, and there's all sorts of encounter opportunities because creatures are drawn to the water. But you could have it go to some whole other cavern system or whatever, or out to the ocean. And when we think of entrances and exits on any level of the Dungeon of the Mad Mage, we have the gates. Now, we have 2 on the 3rd level, and one goes to the 5th and one goes to the 6th, which is interesting because on the 2nd level, there's one that goes to the 5th and 6th as well. They also have the usual level requirement. You've got to be 8th level to use either of them. And since this level is recommended for 7th level characters, they're not going to be able to use that. Which means that you don't really have to go into this dungeon anymore once you've explored it, because you've got gates coming from 2 that go to the all-important 6th level, which is a super nexus point. You've got 4 gates coming from, the 1, 2, 3, and 4. But more importantly, you got 7 gates that go to much lower levels. And then finally, I'll make one last comment on the geometry of this map. Now, you have all sorts of caverns that wind their way through, especially on the route to the stairs that go down to level 4. And what this means is if you're running this electronically, the players can sort of move their tokens around, but in terms of mapping this at a tabletop, you're probably just going to do this theater of the mind. When you get into a battle situation, draw this out on a battle map. And this is something about dungeon design. It's really fun to make caverns and all sorts of windy and crazy hallways, but it can be a little tricky when you're trying to run it, especially if you're doing theater of the mind and you want to track what have the players seen if you're just talking your way through it, and where if they haven't gone there, there's a greater opportunity of getting surprised or something like that. And so this relates to what I talked about earlier. Should they explore the entire level? And oftentimes this occurs in a dungeon when there's a bit of information, some item or something that the players are going to need when they go lower in the dungeon, that if they don't do this, does it hurt them? Does it stop them in their tracks? Or is it just treasure that's contained that the players want to get, magic items, booty and whatnot? So as always in the Dungeon of the Mad Mage, they don't have items or, information that will absolutely, if the players don't get it, stop them in their tracks. On this level, it is information and treasure. The information given is interesting, not vital. You have some hags in Area 10 that if for some reason the players negotiate with them or whatever, they'll give them information about the drow. There's some drow that are being tortured that if you release, they might give you some information about the plans of Trissa and, drow on deeper levels. There is a victim of one of Hallister's apprentices called Prita Creepa, this bizarre woman with these eye stalks. And if the players don't just attack her, she's sort of an outcast. She will give them 2 of the Under Mountains secret cards. These are sort of interesting, again, general information. I don't find these to be, unbelievably powerful bits of information. So the real reason that players might want to, as is their want, to explore the entire 3rd level is for treasure. Now, this isn't an unbelievable treasure trove level, and it is sprinkled, throughout as always. Now, that's 13 treasure sites, but 5 are in areas controlled by the drow, who are very powerful on this level. 4 more are in the areas controlled by the hobgoblins. Another is controlled by a coven of hags, and another one by a mind flayer. And then you have this fake cube in room 14 that it's a throne that anyone who sits on it has to tell the truth, and it's very lightweight. Not super powerful, you could sell it. It's guarded by a Zorn that has been magically made larger by Hallister. And you have this upriver 9B where these 2 Barlugas are guarding a fairly cool treasure, basically coinage of the value of 350 gold and a potion of water breathing. And you might ask yourself, well, why would the players go upriver like this? It's kind of hard to see around the corner. You're going upriver. You have to walk your way through the current, although it's not very swift. The designers did something interesting. They put this poem in here for the pirate's treasure. That's a very obvious clue, but it is a way to get your players to explore an area that they might just ignore. Now, there's another interesting anomaly here. The Mind Flayer, who across the hallway has all these intellect devourers, guarding him, and he has 100 gold pieces. Really? You have a Shimura down here with 600 electrum, 2,000 silver, and 10,000 copper pieces, which equals 600 gold pieces. Admittedly, that's all heavy and all this stuff for a pretty tough monster because of the multi-attacks, the action economy, but the Mind Flayer is pretty tough. It has psychic stun, the brain-eating capability, it can plane shift or whatever, levitate, all these different abilities, 100 gold. All right, and the Mind Flayer happens to be in an area. There's an ambassador from Xanathar who's in the city of the Hobgoblins. The Shimura is a pet of Trissa, the head drow high priestess, which brings us to our composition of forces and the major power centers on this level. The drow control these areas, and the blind hobgoblin king controls these. Blind king, you ask? Yes, that's an interesting wrinkle that the designers put in. Azrak was born blind, which for hobgoblins would probably be cast out or killed or whatever. But Azrak's mother was a sorcerer. She crafted a dagger of blind sight so that no one would notice this. And then, as it turned out, he was a brilliant leader, tactician. He really did great things for the hobgoblins. They took over this ancient dwarven city. But what happened is a band of Dugars came along and stole his dagger, so now he's truly blind. They're hiding this. His Azrak's wife is trying to hide this. There's rumors that something's wrong with him. He sits in his throne room and pretends he can see. And of course, there's a whole side thing about the players can go. The Dugar, I think, are on level 6. The players can go there, get the dagger, bring it back, and get all sorts of rewards, but that's another story. The point here is that the designers have put Azrak in a tenuous situation when the players arrive. This is part of the dynamic dungeon thing we'll talk about a little later. Because even worse, the Mind Flayer, who's staying in the Hobgoblin area as an ambassador from Skullport, has brought the Intellect Devourers, and he's put them in several goblins that are kind of the lower level guards who are spreading rumors that something's wrong with Azrak. So it's always cool to have some monster, with a special feature. I've talked about this in earlier videos about modifying them. And the fact that the Hobgoblins are the good guys on this level is interesting too. Because when you encounter them, it isn't just an instant attack. You have to have identification. Even if you don't, the Hobgoblin guards process you, get your information. There are areas that you can stay and whatnot. All right, so the Drow, in my opinion, are not only the major powers on this level, but they're a little bit of a screw job. Because one thing, the players have to go through areas controlled by them. Either they go this way through area 20, or they go through areas 6 and 5, and then the torture chambers and whatnot. So they're gonna run into them. It says that they're looking out. They've got Quaggoth guards. They've got all sorts of things looking for people, and they're all gonna come. The other thing about this is it says that this dungeon is designed for 7th level characters. But if you look at like room 6, you've got Trissa, who is a Drow High Priestess. Check out her stats. She's also got 4 other Drow and 3 giant spiders. And you have a Drow Mage. Check out his stats. And 4 Quaggoths in room 5A that are going to come running as well. And so the thing is, depending on your group's, party composition, in terms of spellcasters or martial characters, whatever, this could be potentially deadly to TPK style encounter, because Trissa is described as holy evil. She might let them live so that she puts spider eggs in your chest. You find in one room the victim of this, they explode like Alien. You do have some potential allies in the prison cells in Area 5. There's also these torture rooms in Area 7 where if you defeat these Drow, they'll get down below 50%. They'll like, oh, wait, I have information about Trissa, but they're not. It's kind of a Trojan horse. There's this elf mage in Area 5, but she wants to impress Trissa. She wants to join up. But of course, you've got to get to these rooms, and you got to go through these other ones. And if the players go through Area 20, you've got 9 giant spiders, a Drow elite warrior, 3 more Quaggoths, and 12 more Drow. So you don't have the spells on the other side, but the action economy and all these creatures coming running and attacking, and they know the area is deadly, and there's no saying that someone won't run off and get Trissa and the Drow Mage involved. So the thing is, if I'm going to create some super powerful force, I'm either going to have them sort of neutral or potentially, negotiate or see what the players are up to, not just be wholly evil, they want to destroy them, or have some strategy that, they're going to employ. They capture the players and force them to do something. You can punish the players for making stupid moves, but if there's, set up something that is really tough or going towards the unfair level, you don't want to just, run that out. All right, so this brings us to our cross-level intertextuality, the linkages, and as always on these levels, you've got Xanathar from Skullport, who has his representatives on the level. You have Hallister, you've got some of the victims of his apprentices, you've got a Super Zorn. The Drow are linked to activities going on in deeper levels. The Hags have information about the Drow. They hate the Drow. They want them to be wiped out. They might give the players this information. Of course, that means that the players are powerful enough Hags that there's kind of a standoff. Hallister also has this boat in 13B that's helmed by a skeleton tiefling that will take you up and down the river. You can go to Skullport. There's some storylines about going there. The Hags send you there to get information. And if the players do use the gates, you've got the Elder Runes. You look through those, some of them, might have something, Hallister appearing or saying something. He's always on every level. All right, right, so next we have the all-important static versus dynamic dungeon. A static dungeon, you know, like the old days where you just had monsters sitting in every room waiting for the players to arrive, never interacting with one another. Whereas a dynamic, it's clear that they're in this environment, they're aware of what's going on around them. And I think the designers did a pretty good job on this level of not making any static dungeon mistakes and having everything flow from the idea that these creatures here are aware of one another. So first of all, you have a lot of mid-event situations, monsters and NPCs, you know, they're going on just as the players encounter them. So for example, the hags have these two prisoners, a 13-year-old boy and a goblin that they've got chained up, preparing to eat them, that the players can come and rescue or interact with or whatever. You got the prisoners in Area 5, held by the drow, some in mid-torture as we go along. As I said, there's these drow in the torture rooms of 7. There's this sort of bizarre, you know, ritualistic, sadomasochistic scene going on. You have this goblin child, Huggy Bug, in room 21B, who's crying she lost her doll. It's being held in 21A by this Oni that we've talked about in an earlier video. If you rescue this, she gives you some gold. And of course, you have this ongoing conflict between the hobgoblins and the drow for control of this level. This is played out in Area 17. Various groups are always fighting each other. You have drow in Area 16, these two rooms across the river. They're shooting crossbows at anyone who goes by. And I didn't find any static inconsistency such that, you know, you look at this and you go, wait a minute, they would know about this or that. How could they be here? No, the designers did a good job of anything that is, you know, in a dead end or hanging around or whatever. It's explained. If they're under the control of the drow or the hobgoblins and allowed to be there for some reason, or it just makes sense that, you know, they would be able to be in some area. And we often find static dungeon errors when it comes to resource drain encounters, the final category on our list. These are monsters that are there. They have no information for the players, no treasure. They are purely there to drain hit points and spells. This is the price of exploring a dungeon. And you got some cool ones on this level. You got these 3 Gricks up here. If the players wander up to the north, they're waiting for them. You've got a Mad Drider in room 8. You got another Drider down here in area 11. Now the hags use this to guard the back entrance to their lair. You got this room 12 that has these 3 ghosts that are desperately looking for their treasure. Ghosts can be nasty, but they can only go within 100 feet. The players can defeat them, either just defeating ghosts, but they can also create some little treasure for them. You've got these zombies in room 12Q. Around these dead bodies that are controlled by Preta Creepa. But again, they'll fight the players and there's nothing really there. So not a lot of them, but there's enough, you know, to get your players. If they go, you know, they want to explore the entire dungeon, they go to certain areas, they're going to just run into monsters that either kill or run away from or whatever. All right, so that completes my overview of level 3 of the Dungeon of the Mad Mage. And interestingly, I came up with 3 basic lessons from this. So the first one is make sure that your major villain isn't too powerful, either by just pure stats, composition, or its goals. And especially if you're going to force the players through the geography of your dungeon, they have to go through this area. Don't set it up such that, you know, you might have a total party kill on your hands. And I feel like the drow here kind of veer into that. You may feel differently if you've played this level. I'd love to hear comments about, you know, running a group through here, the 7th level, you know, 4-member party they recommend to see what happened. The other thing is when you're designing a dungeon, if you're going to make winding, elaborate caverns that go with no, you know, standard geometry and you're running theater of the mind, you got to track this so that you know where the players have been, where they're going, so that you can quickly do that. You know, again, if you're running online, not as big of a problem. And if you're going to try to map this truly old school, forget it. And finally, this level does show some good usage of static and dynamic dungeons. Everything is pretty dynamic. Everything is in midstream and it makes sense. And there's nothing here where you're like, wait a second, why is this? And it's a good lesson when you're designing dungeons to get away from the monsters just sitting, waiting for the players. So if you like my channel and my content, please subscribe. I'm always looking for more. Leave some comments because I love to read them and answer. But of course, most importantly, keep playing D&D and tell somebody else about it.